Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're cracking open the playbook behind the absolute most monumental shifts in our modern political and corporate landscape. We're talking about the hidden architecture of advocacy and influence. If you're an executive, a business leader, or an advocate trying to move the needle on a major initiative, you already know the stakes are incredibly high. Millions of dollars, countless hours, all poured into driving systemic reform, digital regulation, and social change every single year. Yet the vast majority of these efforts, they stall out. They hit a brick wall. But a select few, they break through and completely reshape our world. Today, we're going to look at exactly how they do it. So why do some policy campaigns succeed while others completely fail? It's a fascinating question, right? We so often see organizations acting as a lone wolf, a massive corporation or this incredibly passionate advocacy group stepping up to the microphone, totally convinced that if they just speak loudly enough or spend enough money, the market or the government will just magically listen. But history shows us over and over again the tragedy of the single-voice campaign. It almost always results in completely wasted resources and deeply frustrating dead ends. But the triumphs, the campaigns that actually rewrite the rules, they use an entirely different mechanism. Section 1. The ultimate answer. Coalition building. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is the hidden in plain sight mechanism used by pretty much every successful movement. Look, in today's highly fractured policy landscape, no major reform, no serious campaign, and absolutely no lasting social change succeeds in isolation. It just doesn't happen. So let's define exactly what we're talking about here. Coalition building is the process of bringing together diverse individuals, groups, or organizations who share a common goal. Now pay super close attention to that word diverse. The real magic here is that these stakeholders can come from completely different backgrounds. They can have wildly contrasting ideologies or totally different long-term corporate interests. But for this one specific issue, for this one vital campaign, they find the exact common ground required to unite. To really grasp the power of this, just look at the sheer variety of stakeholders you can bring to the table. We're talking about combining the legislative power of government bodies with the intense grassroots passion of NGOs and civil society groups. We're looking at aligning the immense reach of the private sector with local community activists and leaders. You can weave in the media, influencers, and even the deep research expertise of academic institutions. If you're watching this right now, I really want you to think about your current network. A truly powerful coalition can consist of literally any combination of these groups. You have the power to broaden your network way beyond your immediate peers. And honestly, when you do that, you unlock a completely new level of leverage. And this brilliantly illustrates what it all boils down to, one foundational principle. Strength in numbers leads to strength in influence. You simply cannot brute force policy change through sheer willpower alone. You need gravity. You need the undeniable weight of numbers. That is the foundational principle for driving any real-world social, corporate, or digital change. Section 2. The mechanics. How coalitions actually work. Let's transition over to the operational side of these movements and break down how these diverse groups actually function together, without necessarily agreeing on everything. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this actually functions in the real world without these highly diverse groups just tearing each other apart. The absolute most crucial mechanic here is prioritizing shared goals over identical opinions. This right here is where most novice campaigns get it totally wrong. A coalition does not mean everyone agrees on everything. Let me give you a perfect example, straight from our source data. Think about climate action policies. You might have strict environmental groups, research scientists, and massive private sector businesses all sitting at the same table. Outside of that room, they might passionately disagree on literally every other political or economic issue. But inside that room, through negotiation, compromise, resource sharing, unified messaging, and coordinated action, they push a singular policy forward. They don't need to be identical, they just need to be aligned. It's a stark contrast, really. No matter how wealthy, no matter how passionate, a single entity is incredibly fragile. A solitary corporation or a lone advocacy group pushing a policy can easily be categorized, sidelined, or frankly, just totally ignored by decision makers. But a coalition of voices, that changes everything. When fierce competitors, industry watchdogs, and community leaders all demand the exact same thing, it creates this undeniable gravity. It becomes infinitely harder to dismiss, and it inevitably leads to a much faster, way more permanent impact. Section 3. The 5 pillars of winning campaigns. Let's move to and see how this builds into a data-driven look at the concrete benefits of forging these partnerships. If you're building a campaign, these are your 5 non-negotiable pillars, the corporate and advocacy strategy you need to accelerate policy implementation. First up, increased political influence. A unified bloc is simply harder for politicians and regulators to dismiss. Second, broader public support. Look, every diverse group you bring into your coalition brings their own distinct audience, rapidly expanding public awareness across entirely different demographics. Third is resource sharing. You're combining funding, highly specific industry expertise, deep research, and sprawling networks into one massive arsenal. Fourth, policy credibility. Now, this one is massive. When policymakers look across the aisle and see normally opposed stakeholders actively agreeing on an issue, they take it so much more seriously. And finally, faster decision-making. When you apply this kind of unified pressure from literally all sides, you dramatically accelerate the adoption and implementation of your initiatives. Section 4. Real-world coalition successes. Let's shift gears to prove these mechanics with some historical precedent, because major governmental shifts never happen in isolation. Consider some of the most monumental shifts in modern history: global climate agreements, sweeping public health reforms, and landmark human rights legislation. When we objectively analyze the history of these massive structural changes, a very clear pattern emerges. None of these were achieved by a single group standing alone. Regardless of the political context surrounding them, the mechanical reality of their success is identical. They succeeded because diverse coalitions deliberately formed to generate unified pressure and maintain relentless persistence over time. Section 5. The ultimate policy insight. We're about to completely dismantle a very common myth about how policy success is actually achieved at the highest levels. So the crucial point is this, and we're arriving at the absolute core of our explainer today. Policy success is not about who has the best argument. It's about who builds the strongest coalition. Let that sink in for a second. You could have the most brilliantly researched white paper. You could have the most airtight, logical argument in the entire world. But if you walk into that room alone, you will likely lose to an inferior argument that is backed by a broad, highly organized, and diverse coalition. Genuine influence requires partnership. In modern governance, corporate strategy, and advocacy, coalition building is no longer just optional. It's the essential first step. If you want to influence policy, drive real reform, or create meaningful change, your first move isn't persuasion, it's partnership. It's unity. So, to all the leaders, the executives, and the advocates watching right now, are you building your coalition? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you approach your next major campaign.